friend of mine is writing his memoirs right now. He's newly retired, and his kids and his grandkids have asked him to collect all these favorite stories that he's always told. And he's one of these people who has a knack for telling stories in an amazing way that makes you feel like you're there. And it makes you laugh, and it makes you know what's going on. So he's in the process right now of collecting all these stories and crafting them into his memoirs. And these stories that he's telling and these stories he's writing, these are his milestone events. And the Bible is filled with milestone events. A generation after God's people were rescued from Egypt, those people's children were standing at the banks of the Jordan River. They were standing looking across at the land that God had promised them, the promised land. The problem was that they could see the land, but they didn't know how they were going to get to it. The Jordan River was flooded because it was flood season, and the river was many times as wide as it normally is. And the people wondered, how will we get across? Well, that's when God showed up, and God did something extraordinary. Just as God had rescued these people's parents from the land of Egypt by dividing the waters so that they could walk right across the Red Sea, God did it again. God slowed the flow of this flooding river to just a trickle so that these hundreds of thousands of people could walk across into God's promise. That was a milestone event, and God could not let that event go unmarked. So God said to the people, choose leaders from each of your 12 groups. Each leader goes into the river, grabs a stone from the river that you just crossed, and brings it back to the place where you're going to stay that night. Those stones should be built up into a memorial that mark God's work. So they did. The leaders went into the river, grabbed the stones, brought them back, and built them into a visible mark of God's work. And God said, for generations to come, your children and your children's children will see those stones stacked up, and they will say, what are those stones for? And God says, you will respond that the Lord our God showed up, parted these waters, and allowed us to walk across into the land that God promised and fulfilled His promise. This reminds people that God can do incredible and faithful things. That was a milestone event. And we love milestone events because milestone events remind us that God is active today just as God has been active before. And so we collect things, we take pictures, we remember stories, we tell stories, we talk to people so that we can remember the things that God has done in the past, the things that are milestone events to us. And those kinds of things, they build up our hope. They remind us how confident we can be because of God. They give us hope about the future and about the fact that God can work again just as God has worked before. I can't help but think that this is the kind of thing that Jesus' close friend, Peter, was talking about when he wrote that we who follow Jesus are like living stones. We are living, breathing memorials that mark God's work. So that when people befriend us or when people see us, when we spend time with other people, when we tell stories, we are living memorials that show that God has done things and that God again can do things that are incredible. We exist to give hope to people that God can move in them. We're here to build people's confidence that God loves them and can do incredible things. We are here to remind people that God can do work just as God has done before. We are living, breathing memorials that mark God's work. And that means something for how we spend our time. That means something for what we do and what we don't do. That means something for what we say and what we don't say. That means something for how we use everything we have. So what if we lived like milestones that mark God's work?